Right now on Currents News, Cardinal George Pell is out of prison. But what's next now that his abuse conviction is overturned?
He is not one to sit around and twiddle his thumbs.
New York's highest daily death toll yet from the coronavirus, but signs of hope are emerging. Some Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn and other religious believers across the country are defying bans on large gatherings, just as the Jewish community is about to begin Passover.
Fundamentally, Passover is the story of freedom. Not a small thing as so many people feel incarcerated.
Plus, it's been weeks since anyone has set foot in Milan's most famous cathedral. Now, one of the world's most talented artists will perform there Easter Sunday. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. Cardinal George Pell is a free man tonight after spending over 400 days in a Melbourne prison. The most senior Catholic official to be found guilty of sexual abuse has now been acquitted. Currents News' Emily Druby has the latest.
Cardinal George Pell seen leaving prison after being unanimously acquitted of sex abuse charges by Australia's highest court. All 7 justices ruling that doubts about the cardinal's guilt didn't get sufficient consideration from the trial jury. In a statement, Pell, who had been a powerful cardinal at the Vatican, says he holds no ill will towards his accuser and that the only basis for justice is truth. My trial was not a referendum on the Catholic Church, nor a referendum on how church authorities in Australia dealt with the crime of pedophilia in the church. He added, "The point was whether I committed these awful crimes, and I did not." He has always proclaimed his innocence.
I'm innocent of these charges. They are false. The whole idea of sexual abuse is abhorrent to me.
After an earlier jury failed to reach a verdict, the Catholic cleric was convicted at a second trial in December 2018. He was accused of molesting 2 choir boys inside Melbourne's St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1996. In August of 2019, his first appeal was rejected. Now that the cardinal's name has been cleared, the Archbishop of Melbourne expressed his emotions.
I had a reaction of relief for the cardinal, but an immediate concern for Jay, because he has gone through this journey offering his story and him wanting to be able to be heard.
The Archbishop referring to the accuser known only as the letter J. The Holy See released a statement welcoming the decision, reading, "Entrusting his case to the court's justice, Cardinal Pell has always maintained his innocence and has waited for the truth to be ascertained." The Vatican also adding that the Church is strongly committed to protecting young people and the vulnerable from abuse. Hours after the court's decision, and without mentioning Cardinal Pell by name, Pope Francis prayed for those who have been wrongly persecuted.
In these days of Lent, we've seen the persecution Jesus suffered, and how the doctors of law were relentlessly set against him. He was judged under relentless hatred, with relentless hatred, being innocent. I would like to pray today for all the people who suffered unjust sentences because of unrelenting hatred.
Cardinal Pell is now free after spending 13 months in prison. He's now at the Carmelite Monastery in Melbourne. Christopher White, the national correspondent for the tablet and CRUX, believes that going forward, Pell will likely stay out of the public eye.
Most people are expecting that he lives a fairly quiet life from here on out, that he won't have an official post either in Rome or in Australia.
Cardinal Pell remains a member of the College of Cardinals, and the 78-year-old could still be called on to elect a new pope until he turns 80. Emily Druby, Currents News.
Joining us now for an in-depth look at what Cardinal Pell's acquittal means for him and for the Vatican is the editor-in-chief of CRUX, John Allen. And John, now that he's freed from prison after more than a year, what's next for Cardinal Pell?
Well, immediately, he may be facing additional legal challenges. The lawyer who represented the accuser in this case has told Australian media that she has at least 8, possibly more, other alleged victims who are planning to come forward to file claims against Cardinal Pell. It is also possible the accuser in this case may file a civil action. So his legal odyssey may not yet be over. But I think the fundamental thing is that he is a free man, and knowing George Pell as I do, he is not one to sit around and twiddle his thumbs. I would imagine that he will want to resume playing some kind of leadership role in the church. Of course, he no longer has a gig in the Vatican. I think it is unlikely, probably, he will return to Rome. My guess would be that he will remain in Australia, but I would expect him to write and speak and continue being a point of reference as he always has been.
So what does the Vatican do now about him? The Holy See had been waiting for the appeals in Australia to conclude. Could the church launch its own investigation?
Well, the first thing the Vatican does is breathe an enormous sigh of relief because two things are true about this situation. One is that I don't really know anyone in the Vatican who believed that George Pell was actually guilty of these charges. Now, there are certainly plenty of people in the Vatican who have their own reasons for maybe not liking George Pell or not agreeing with him on a number of issues. But when they drill down in the details of these charges, anyone who knows the Catholic Church would just find them highly implausible. I mean, you're supposed to believe that a archbishop in his own cathedral on a Sunday split off with no explanation from the closing procession of a mass, went into a highly trafficked sacristy where there was no one except these two choir boys. In a matter of minutes, without removing his liturgical vestments, managed to sexually abuse them, and then went back outside the cathedral to greet people as they were leaving as if nothing had happened. Any one of those things doesn't pass the smell test. Together, I don't know anyone who took them seriously. The Vatican also understands that it is in a very weak position to be the one to say that out loud, because were it to go first, so to speak, inevitably it would look like the clerical club taking care of its own.
Right, and before the charges were filed, there seems to be growing friction between him and others at the Vatican. Will that have any role in determining the Cardinal's future?
Truth of it is, George Pell has always been a bit of a bull in a china shop. He came in, tried to sort of take a flamethrower to existing practices in the Vatican. A lot of people did not exactly appreciate it. By the time these charges were filed in the summer of 2017, he had already lost a number of internal power struggles. It was clear that his star had dimmed. That calculus does not change by this verdict. It's not as if George Pell magically goes back to February of 2014 when Pope Francis appointed him to that role. I think he goes back to the man who I think was already on the outs in terms of how important he was in the Vatican.
And the church continues to mount a vigorous worldwide campaign to protect young people and the vulnerable from clerical abuse. Does today's decision impact that at all?
No, the Vatican in its statement today welcoming the acquittal of Cardinal Pell also insisted that its commitment to protecting children and to prosecuting abusers remains undimmed. I think the takeaway here is different. I think the takeaway here is you don't remedy one injustice with another, or to put it more simply, two wrongs don't make a right. I think the principle at stake here is that if we are going to stand for justice, then justice has to be across the board. It has to apply both to those people who actually were abused, but it also means that in those instances where you have a cleric, whether he's a cardinal or a simple parish priest, if he has been unjustly accused, then that wrong has to be remedied as well. I think that's the position the Vatican is trying to take.
Okay, John Allen, editor-in-chief of CRUX, thanks for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
Stay with both Currents News and The Tablet for comprehensive and continuing coverage of Cardinal George Pell. Watch us each night at 7 p.m. and go to thetablet.org for updates. The latest now on the coronavirus crisis. Deaths in New York State are hitting a new high after 2 days of lower numbers. 731 people passing away in a 24-hour period from the disease. But at the same time, other signs are easing. Governor Andrew Cuomo pointing to a falling rate of hospitalizations and saying death is a lagging indicator. He insists testing is key to getting the crisis under control and easing the lockdown.
It's going to come down to how good we are with testing. You're not going to end the infection and end the virus before you start restarting life. I don't think you have that luxury. How do you start the economy back up? How do you start getting back to work as quickly as possible? It's going to come down to testing.
Cuomo added the New Yorkers who have died are in his thoughts and prayers. The new 731 deaths bring the total statewide to 5,489. There are nearly 139,000 confirmed cases in New York, and more than 17,000 are hospitalized. But for the fourth straight day, the growth rate at hospitals has been 7% after hitting at least 20% for weeks. The number of patients in intensive care stands at more than 4,500, but the increase in ICU cases is the smallest since March 21st. At the JAVITS Center, the military is on the job tonight treating COVID-19 patients. The facility has its own ICU and about 2,500 beds. And the Comfort, the U.S. Navy's hospital ship in New York Harbor, is bringing virus victims on board. That's a switch requested by Cuomo and cuts capacity to 500 beds. With Christians all over the world observing Holy Week and Passover just a day away, worshipers are making plans to celebrate online because of widespread stay-at-home orders. And though most faith-based communities are following the guidelines, some are not. Currents News' Jessica Easthope reports on how some are choosing not to fulfill their religious obligations from a distance.
This is the New York City Police Department. Due to the current health emergency, members of the public are reminded to keep safe.
In Brooklyn, members of Orthodox Jewish communities gathering for funeral services over the last several days had the NYPD struggling to disperse the crowds as they defied social distancing guidelines. Jewish leaders say the community is largely adhering to the ban, but is working closely with the city to make sure everyone complies.
The people of the city are doing everything possible to fight this virus, to do the right thing in terms of shelter in place.
Other parts of the country are having issues too.
I want to advise you of your rights.
In central Louisiana, Pastor Tony Spell was arrested and cited for defying the state's ban on gatherings of more than 50 people, saying he will continue to hold large services.
We continue to worship and practice our First Amendment rights. Do not be intimidated to come to this building because of fear that has been put in you.
Spell believes religious institutions should be considered essential and therefore exempt from the order. At one evangelical church in Cincinnati, Ohio, people were still attending services in person, many of them with children, hugging other churchgoers as they enter, saying they are not fearful of the potential spread.
Aren't you concerned you could infect other people if you get sick inside?
No.
People who don't go to this
No.
church.
I'm covered in Jesus' blood.
A pastor in Lodi, California, also refusing to comply, saying that gathering in person is essential to the Christian faith, even sending a cease and desist order to the local law enforcement, citing violations of religious freedom. Back in New York, people could face fines of up to $1,000 for not following the social distancing guidelines. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
The Diocese of Brooklyn closed all churches in Brooklyn and Queens on March 20th until further notice. The latest now on the health of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He's battling a coronavirus infection in intensive care at a London hospital. Doctors are giving him oxygen, but he hasn't needed a ventilator. Downing Street says Johnson is stable and remains in good spirits. The Foreign Secretary says he's confident Johnson will recover because he's a fighter. There's a lot more news headed your way.
I'm bristling, I'm chafing, Allison. I want to get out there. I want to embrace people. I want to give them a hug.
Cardinal Timothy Dolan as frustrated as the rest of us with this social distancing, but he tells us why it can be beneficial to our faith. Plus, the Pope digging deep to help those who are suffering from the pandemic. And one of the most widely celebrated Jewish holidays begins tomorrow. We'll get some insight on the importance of Passover and how the virus is changing the celebration this year for many.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
During During this pandemic, Jewish families will be celebrating their triumph over a different plague. The holy days of Passover remember when God helped the Israelites escape slavery, inflicting plagues on the Egyptians. Joining me now is Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, president of the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, to talk about what we can learn from this story, especially during this crisis. So, Rabbi, what are the lessons of Passover, and are they applicable to what we're all going through now?
It's a great question. They are hugely applicable. Let's pull back in general to Passover and then zoom in, funny in the age of Zoom meetings, to zoom in on the specific lessons to this moment. Fundamentally, Passover is the story of freedom. Not a small thing as so many people feel incarcerated, maybe for good reason, but feel trapped in their homes. It is the story of moving from slavery to human dignity. It is the story of moving from darkness to light, even at what feels like the darkest of times. Passover is the story of the birth of the Israelite nation, as you mentioned, of the Jewish people. But even bigger, it's the story of people knowing that the world as we find it today is not the world as it needs to be always, and that better times are ahead of us, even if we can't fully see them from where we're seated in our homes at this moment.
So true. And your Passover celebrations are changing because of the coronavirus. You told us you're adding a video screen so your mother in California can also join you. Many Jewish families and Catholic families, when we celebrate Easter, might do the same. It's that important to keep these wonderful religious traditions, isn't it?
Absolutely. New moments, painful moments and joyful moments, give rise to great religious leadership saying, how do we respond? How do we relocate those same eternal values, even in new ways? The values are eternal. The practices may shift and change because of the moment. They may even change in ways this year that by next year they'll go back to the old ways. But I think that's really the task. Locate the values, figure out how to share them and celebrate them, and don't let the moment get in the way of knowing that almost every one of us still has things for which they can be grateful.
And during Passover, Orthodox Jewish people are not allowed to use electricity. So how do you think that will affect people who are quarantined?
So it really depends. I mean, I'm an Orthodox rabbi, and there are shifts going on in the parts of the Orthodox community that will allow modified use of electricity. So that screen that you mentioned at our table will have been turned on before the holiday begins, and eventually that screen will die, and that will be the end. Other people will be fully engaged with their screens, and that's fine if that's what their practice permits. And some will say, no electricity at all. So here's what I would say. The holiday is going to begin, right? Not that long way. Wednesday night is the Seder. Reach out to people. Write down your thoughts. Share them in advance and tell them, don't read this now. But wherever you are Wednesday night, open these thoughts, open these messages, put up pictures, and know that we are with you in whatever way we can be.
Wow, that's a great idea. And many are talking about how life after the coronavirus crisis will never be the same. There will be a new normal. How will faith help us make that transition?
I tend to be among those who think there will be some kind of new normal. Ever is a long time. Things tend to change and then go back and then change some more. But what I think what religion, whatever the faith is, can do is give us the strength to live into that newness, to give us the courage to know that we are never alone, to give us the hope that there are better things ahead, and to remind us that we are God's partners in making things happen. And that means that I also don't worry too much about that new normal. I worry about where we are now and what contribution each of us can make, not in some end time, whatever that might look like, but in this time.
All right, Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, president of the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership. Thank you for joining us, and have a happy Passover.
Thank you so much.
Pope Francis and the chief rabbi of Rome are wishing each other happy holidays ahead of Passover and Easter Sunday. The Holy Father invited all Jews and Christians to come together to renew the bonds of friendship. He's also urging help for all those suffering during the crisis. The rabbi agreed. Here in New York, Cardinal Timothy Dolan is sending a message of hope ahead of Passover and Holy Week. Speaking on TV this morning, he talked about the lessons learned from the holy days and how social distancing can bring us closer to God.
Even though we might miss, and I hope people do, they're telling me they do, I sure miss their company, and I'm glad they miss ours. Even though they're going to miss that physical proximity, actually being in the church or their synagogue for worship and the sacraments and the Holy Eucharist, there's still a chance here inside, which is where it really counts, of renewing our faith that God's in charge and that He delivers us from darkness to light, from death to life.
The Cardinal said he's bristling to get back outside so he can give people a hug. With public masses suspended, the Diocese of Brooklyn will celebrate the CHRISM Mass in June. The service normally occurs during Holy Week. It's when Bishop DiMarzio blesses the holy oils that are used in the sacraments throughout the year. The CHRISM Mass will be on June 19th, the Feast of the Sacred Heart. Holy Week around the world is being celebrated differently this year. All services will be streamed live, including within the Diocese of Brooklyn. Here's the schedule for live Holy Week Masses to be aired on Net TV tomorrow. 8 a.m. English, 8:30 Creole, 9 Italian, 9:30 Polish, 10 Spanish, 10:30 Mandarin Chinese, and 11 a.m. the Korean Mass. Net TV is New York's Catholic station, and you can find it on Verizon's Fios Channel 48, on Optimum's Channel 30, and on Spectrum's Channel 97. The Mass schedule is online at netny.tv. Still to come on Currents News, a way to keep you connected to Christ on Holy Saturday. We'll tell you how you can view the Shroud of Turin, believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus. And want to celebrate Easter with Andrea Bocelli? We'll show you how you can do just that when we come back. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. Pope Francis is setting up an emergency fund to help those suffering from the pandemic. The Holy Father is the first to contribute, making a $750,000 donation. The fund is being managed by the Vatican's mission societies, and Francis wants the money to aid those people and communities who are being tragically impacted by the spread of COVID-19. And finally tonight, two big events streaming online that you should know about. The Shroud of Turin will be displayed on Holy Saturday. It's believed to be Christ's burial cloth. The images will be available to the whole world through online streaming. The extraordinary veneration will start at 11 o'clock in New York on Holy Saturday. The faithful are being invited to pray in the time of the pandemic. And on Easter Sunday, there will be Music for Hope. That's when one of the world's most talented artists, Andrea Bocelli, will perform. It's been weeks since anyone has set foot in Milan's most famous cathedral, the Duomo. Bocelli will be there on Easter Sunday at 1 o'clock New York time. His inspiration is Christ's resurrection, which, as he explains, celebrates the trust in a life that triumphs. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Good night and God bless.